Hello and welcome to today's short video on structural family therapy. And you probably heard about this structural family therapy. It's one of the most important therapies. So I'm going to explain you a little bit about it. My name is Elian Gomez and I have PhD in psychology. So a little bit about structural family therapy. It's the origin of it. We'll talk about Salvador Minuchin and his first work or activities with poor families, then basic concepts, therapeutic interventions, the role of the therapist, applications of structural family therapy, and then the difference between structural and strategic family therapy, because many people get confused with it. So let's start it. Salvador Minuchin, this guy over here, he worked with poor families, as I was mentioning before, and he saw that something that was repeating as a pattern was the disorganized patterns of behavior and the lack of structure. So he thought that something that needed to change was this element of structure. They needed to have some structure to be able to deal with it better with the problems and stressful situations, as well as interact in a healthier way between the members of the family. So he worked on changing negative patterns and making some awareness on boundaries and subsystems. So these are basic concepts. When you think about boundaries from his perspective, you have to think about this kind of spectrum between diffuse and rigid boundaries, where diffuse boundaries would lead into enmeshment and rigid boundaries into disengagement. And if you think about a family that maybe has very rigid boundaries where the children are considered as subordinated to the parents in a very rigid way, that there's no way that their voice will be heard. Discipline is very rigid and strict. They will be disengaged from their emotionally from their children, and that will create a big space between them, a big gap that could lead into difficulties for the children talking about their problems to the parents. And diffuse parenting or boundaries, I would say not parenting, boundaries, will lead into enmeshment where it could potentially have certain consequences like accepted or normalized incest or abuse, sexual abuse of the children, because there's no differentiation between like who are the parents with whom you can have a relationship, a sexual relationship, and with whom not. And this, of course, also very unhealthy, as well as the diffuse boundaries where the children feel that they have the same authority as a parent, or there's no authority figure to set the rules, for example. And of course, once you think about the boundaries, you have to think, so between who are these boundaries? So then it comes the next concept, that is subsystems. And subsystems are the relationships that are established between maybe two of the members. Could be between the parents, or between one of the children and the mother, or any alignments, any relationship that might be between just few members of the family and create a subsystem, and could lead into some power struggle. Maybe the mom and the son are aligned against the father, and they are trying to get more more visibility, or they want to decide over what's going to happen and what are they going to do. And there's a power struggle between what the father thinks and what the other subsystem thinks. And there's also coalitions. So in that sense, like if they unite against the other member for a specific reason, that is a coalition, and that's also an unhealthy relationship. So he would analyze the structure and the relationship between the family using this type of diagrams. That is a map of the family, and the lines would have a very important meaning. And for example, here we see that a straight line would mean involvement, as the broken line would be under involvement, double line over involvement, and a line with an X is a conflict. So here you see that the mother and the stepfather have a lot of conflict in the relationship. The mother is aligned or strongly involved with the church. There's over-involvement of the mother on our patient, our main subject of interest. And there's under involvement of the stepfather with this patient, and also with the birth father and the patient, as well as with the sister. There's another conflict between the sister and the patient, and also between the patient and the school and the mother. So there's a lot of interesting things that this diagram will tell us, and here we use them to first picture what is happening in the family, and then tell them about ideas of how to change this structure. And applications, well, some families that would benefit of this structural family therapy could be families that were impacted by trauma, or blended families with step parents or lesbian couples, single parents, and intergenerational families, as well as divorcees and their children. So, I mean, almost anybody could benefit, but these are the ones that would benefit the most, because they are the ones lacking structure or having a broken structure after a trauma or a crisis. And the therapeutic interventions, well, first of all, we, or the counselor, would highlight and modify the interactions, first looking at the spontaneous behavior, and then enacting it in therapy. And this enactment would be directed by the therapist, and it would need restructuring. So the restructuring would be based in certain elements of cognitive behavioral therapy, like reframing and looking at circular perspectives. And this idea is that we help each other change. So it's like not one member that is wrong that should change, but we share and get feedback from the other members in a circular way. And of course, in the case that there's not enough boundaries, or that the boundaries are too rigid or too diffuse, then setting healthy boundaries is important for that family, and the unbalancing issues of maybe power struggles. So trying to avoid taking sides, but maybe it's necessary to be in one side to be able to see the other, or to understand each other and then balance the family again. And many times there were unproductive assumptions of why this is acceptable or why this is the way that it is. So challenging them would be a good way to restructure the family. And also shaping competency, because many times the people don't have the skills, they are not competent in being parents or in raising a family. And then in general, if the families would refuse or would not like it, then they would kind of work together in going step by step slowly in this process. So the role of the therapist or the counselor would be first to actively join the family, so to be able to really know the structure of the family, because sometimes if you just tell as a client, and you tell the counselor what is the structure of the family, you might be biased or missing certain things. So if the therapist join actively the family situation, like go to the client's home, then that would be more helpful to understand what is happening. And in that sense, well, the role is to help change the boundaries and subsystems. So it's not letting the client take responsibility on their own, but guiding them and assuming certain level of responsibility of changing, well, first training them and then helping them change their boundaries and subsystems. Yeah, they would organize the family relations. They would also create short-term goals for the family when the family was not able to create it for themselves, and even create rules for the family, because as we said before, there could be unspoken rules or rules that were not very clear. So creating rules for the family would help them to have more clear boundaries and subsystems that were all healthy. But of course, it's not easy to do this, so the therapist should first mimic the language of the client to be able to enter the family, because if he presents himself as the expert and coming from like a very scientific jargon, then the family might not easily let them into their lives. So these are some of the techniques: joining, evaluate boundaries, create a family map, and restructure the family. And if we think about structural and strategic family therapy, many people have told me that they get confused, mixed up with these because of the word and the fact that, I mean, they're working on similar things, but they're not the same. First of all, structural family therapy was created by Salvador Mirachi, while strategic family therapy was created by Jay Haley. And the structural family therapy looks at the interactions to understand the structure, and then the organization to change the structure if necessary. And they think that any symptoms, any problems between the members is a byproduct of the structure that is not working properly or is failing. And the structural changes must occur in the family before the individual symptoms can be reduced. In that sense, like we first look at the whole picture of the whole family before we can look at the individual, even though, like we said before, in the map, we had a patient that was the defined patient, but he's not alone in the relationships. Those relationships could influence the problem, affect it, or make it more severe. So the techniques are very active, very directed, and they are well thought out. While the strategic therapy with Jay Howling, I mean, some people do it in combination, and that's why it becomes a little bit difficult to see the difference. But it's first of all working on presenting the problems and accept them as real and not just as symptoms of the system dysfunction. Because in the structural, well, family therapy, there's a structure, and if the structure doesn't work, then there are symptoms that occur as a byproduct. Here, well, the symptoms are not necessarily based on the structure or the function, the dysfunction of the system, but they can be on their own problems that are, on their own. Also strategic, it's goal-oriented, so because of that, or solution-oriented as well as goal-oriented, it's can be very brief. It doesn't need to be all the time, but in general, it's to be short, and it's process focus. And also, it changes the result of the family that follows the therapist directions and changes transactions. And in that sense, they are quite different. So it's not so directive as the structural family therapy. There's a little more flexibility. And one is longer term, because the structural, you need a lot more time to really look at the structure, the boundaries, many visitations to the family's home. And strategic is all done in the therapeutic sessions, and they don't actively go to visit the family. Okay, well, these are the main differences, and I hope that if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to know more about it, you can read it or you can email me, and I'll tell you more about it. Good luck and have a nice day. Bye-bye.